Tonight we are moving from the Judges period into the Davidic period. We will be covering the last bit of, well, actually only one story of the Judges, just because it connects with David. And then we'll be moving on from there. And we're only going to cover just a little bit of the first part of David's life. We won't be covering all of it, because that's going to take us several weeks. But tonight is actually session 8. You believe we've been doing this for 8 weeks now. And if you're watching on YouTube, it's the 9th week, because I had to split one of my last one, I had to split that up in half because it went long. But tonight is actually going to be a conglomeration of places. All the other nights we've covered one period or one room, or one city. But this one, there wasn't really any excavations that were done where we're going to be talking about. And so we still went there, and they know this is the place where this happened. These stories happened, so that's why we're covering them. I'd like you to have in your mind a picture as you read these stories in your Bible. I want you to be able to see, well, what I saw and how it changed my view of what I was reading. But we will be in the end of Judges and the beginning of David ben Yisai, or son of Jesse. One of the two things that shocked me most when I went to Israel was the massive amount of people that lived there. I don't know, in my mind, as I read through the scriptures, I saw it as a sparsely populated place. It's not. There's lots of people there. But what also surprises me, even though there's a lot of people there, it's really small. It's really small. I've got pictures on the next slide, and I'll show you. But the one picture, this is the Valley of Elah, which we will be covering next week. And I'm standing on the hill there above the valley. And I look over, and I can see this town of Ashkelon, which is literally right on the border of the Mediterranean Sea. I can see it with my own eyes. I take a picture of it, and usually, you know how you take pictures with your phone, you can't zoom in as far as what you can actually see. And even in the pictures, you can barely make out the Mediterranean Sea. Well, from here, it's literally just a few miles over to Bethlehem, one of the places we'll be talking tonight. But another picture I've taken is from the Herodian, which is just south of Bethlehem. And from standing on top of the Herodian, I can look over and I can see the Jordanian border and the Dead Sea. It's in a matter of 2 pictures. I mean, that's tiny. It's literally, the entire country's the size of New Jersey. As the crow flies from Ashkelon to En-Gedi, which is border to border, it's about 45 miles is all the width it is. Which, that's from Richmond to London, straight south on 75. I did that yesterday going to a job. I mean, it's nothing. It really is. It shocked me how small it was. But anyways, here's the first picture. I was standing above the Valley of Elah, and I'm looking over, and right here, this is Ashkelon, and right in behind it, it's a little darker color. That's the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, on the far west border. Here I'm standing on the Herodian, and right there, that's Bethlehem, and there's Jerusalem. I mean, that's the Mount of Olives, actually, right there. Jerusalem starts way over here. But you get the idea that these are long places apart. They're really not. This is grand total from those 2 arrows. That's a grand total of around 4 miles. It's nothing. It's really small. I mean, it's not even here to the depot. It's small. And then while I'm standing, I turn around from this side and I look this way, and that blue right there, that's the sea, or Dead Sea, and in behind that's the mountains of Jordan. I mean, it's such a small place. Well, what we're going to be covering tonight is actually 4 places particularly, and one we're just going to mention. We're going to be in the north here. We're going to start in this place called Jezreel. Then we're going to go to Bethlehem, then to En-Gedi, and then back to Beth Shean, which is over by Jezreel. And so we're going to cover almost the full length of Israel tonight in just these short little videos, these short little places. The first place we want to go is to this place called Jezreel. Right here, this is the Mount Gilboa, okay? And here's the Jezreel Valley. This is also called the Valley of Megiddo or Armageddon, if you like your Revelation. Okay, that's all right here. Here's Mount Carmel. There's Megiddo. Here's the Jezreel Valley. There is Jezreel itself, and it's at the base of Mount Gilboa. When you walk into the place, it's just beautiful. And this is wintertime, so it's not as lush and as pretty as it normally would be. But, man, wouldn't it be great if we could look like that at wintertime? They had just some beautiful flowers as you walked in. And this is actually a picture of one of their maps that you could see. But I blew it up so you could see right here, this is literally the base of Mount Gilboa. Right here's the valley, that's the mountain, and it goes up just like what ours do. Real steep, real steep. But right here at the base is this cave where there's a spring that comes out. And it comes right out of the base of the mountain. Here's the spring source. Now, because we're wintertime, it's not as heavy. If it was springtime or summer, it would be actually much deeper. Not a great amount, but it would be deeper. And you see this is where the headwaters come out, and it goes down for quite a while. This nice, beautiful little stream, real quiet. It's a gorgeous place. It is one place that you'd love to just take your family and go and picnic at on any given day. This is moving water, but you can't hardly tell it. I mean, except for the ripples that you see right here, that's it. And the only reason there's ripples there is because, well, there was people drinking from it from our group. I'll explain that in just a second. But the reason it's important is this is the place that the shepherds would bring their sheep to come and drink from. You remember in our Psalm 23 study, he leads me beside still waters because sheep are notoriously scared of everything. Well, this is an ideal place. Notice how low it is, the water is, compared to the ground. It's very close. And once the spring, waters come in, it's got more water there, so the sheep don't even hardly have to bend over to get it. It's perfect. And yet, even though it's flowing water, it's nice and quiet and calm, beautiful, clear. I didn't drink from this. I drank from Hezekiah's tunnel, but we'll talk about that one when we get there in a couple weeks. That's pretty cool. And I'll tell you what, it was some beautiful tasting water. And I'm not one that likes water. So why did I bring us to this place at the base of Mount Gilboa? Well, although it's named Jezreel, there's a name that you might know it better by, and it's called Gideon Springs. Now, I want you to picture in your mind a group of 10,000 men surrounding this stream and going way out there and drinking from it. This is the place where God separated the massive fighting force that Gideon had to absolutely nothing but crazies. So let's go there. Because of lack of time, I don't want to cover the whole thing. But Judges chapter 6, verses 14 through 24, the angel of the Lord, not just any angel, the angel of the Lord appears to Gideon. Says, mighty man of valor, as he's hiding, grinding, just makes fun of him. He meets with him, tells him that God's going to use him. Judges chapter 6, verse 25, the first time he does is right after this appearance. And he goes and he tears down the altar of Baal that the Israelites had built. Right after that, Gideon sets out the fleeces, you remember, before the Lord. It's not to be confused with feces. These are fleeces. They were little pieces of cotton. It's two totally different things. And God confirmed, even in that he wanted him to go and attack for the Israelites. So chapter 7, verse 1, Gideon makes a call to the Israelites, and 32,000 people show up. Now, that sounds like a lot, but you find out from Judges 8:10 that they were facing a troop of 135,000 men with chariots and horses, the tanks of their day. So 32,000 men doesn't come up very big. But God says, I see that you have 32,000, but that's too many. I can win that pretty easy, and it wouldn't bring me glory. So I want you to cut it down. Ask everybody that's going to be scared, that's got a new family, any good reason to leave the battle. If they want to go home, just send them home. 22,000 people leave. Talk about demoralizing. You're already, and I don't know what the percentage is, but what is that, 5-1? Something like that, 32,000 against 135, something like that. And then you lose 22,000, and now you have a grand total of 10. So you're outnumbered, what is that, 135-1? That's pretty bad. And then God says, well, Gideon, guess what? That's still too many guys. I need you to mark that down just a little bit. I want you to go to the spring, and we're going to take the numbers down to a good number. Let's go there. Chapter 7, verse 4. There are still too many soldiers, the Lord told Gideon. Bring them down to the water, and I will refine them for you there. Therefore, when I say to you, this one will be going with you, he'll go with you. But no one may go about whom I tell you. But no one may go about whom I tell you, this one won't be going with you. So he brought his soldiers down to the water, and the Lord told Gideon, you are to cull out everyone who laps up the water with his tongue like a dog from everyone who kneels to drink. Hey, that's a great idea. If you kneel down and you take a drink, you're looking around, and you cup it from your hand, you drink, that's a smart guy. And the ones that, they're lapping like a dog, looking like a fool, acting all crazy, yep, we're going to cull those guys out. Gideon's probably thinking, that's a pretty good idea, Lord. The contingents of soldiers who lapped water with their hands to their mouths numbered 300 men, but everyone else kneeled to drink the water. Well, I only lose 300. I'm down to 9,700. That's pretty good, Lord. Then the Lord told Gideon, I'm going to deliver you with the 300 that lapped by giving the Midianites into your control. The guys that look crazy, that lapped like a dog, yeah, that's the ones I want to use. This is Gideon, who's already set out the fleeces like, God, are you really sure you want me to go? And then God does this to him? I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation. Lord, I must not have heard you right. You said you wanted the 300 crazies? Yeah, I did. Oh, okay. So the crazy ones. I just need to be sure, Lord, because, they're pretty bad soldiers. Yep, that's the ones. You mean the ones that lapped like a dog out of their hands? That's the ones you want? Yeah, that's the one. Okay, Lord, I'm just making sure. It had to have been a great conversation. I really do believe that God has a sense of humor. Oh, yeah. And, man, sometimes great things happen. Oh, if we could just trust him like Gideon did, that mighty man of valor. Anyways, it's a beautiful place. And we're going to come back to Mount Gilboa at the end because it makes a connection with David. But now we're going to move to the time of David's period, the era of the kings. We're moving from the Judges period. Samuel has been born, kind of like we talked about at Shiloh, with Hannah's prayer. Who did Jesus say wrote the book of Deuteronomy? Do you remember? It was actually more generalized than that. Jesus said that Moses wrote the law. Now that should, if Jesus says that Moses wrote the law, that should settle the issue for us, should it not? Yeah. And yet there's a whole bunch of idiots that say, oh no, Moses didn't write it all. And oh no, Moses couldn't have written that. Well, if Jesus says it, that's good enough for me. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14 through 20, God made provision for Israel having a king all the way back before they entered the Promised Land. We've often had the idea from the story of Samuel and King Saul that God was not happy, was upset with the children of Israel because they wanted a king. Now, this is partially true. He was not unhappy that they wanted a king. He was unhappy with their timing. God wanted David to be king and had it planned for David, and we'll talk a little bit about it. You can do more study on it. But the people wanted a good-looking king. And God gave them exactly what they wanted. And then they found out, guess what? We really don't want that. How many times have you wanted to go ahead of God, you wanted something special, and you move on ahead of His blessing, and then you find out it turns bitter in your stomach? Time and time again. Well, that's exactly what happened with the kings. God gave them parameters for the kings before they even entered the Promised Land. God had it in the books to have a king. God's always wanted a king over Israel. He's always wanted that. But they didn't have good timing. So, let's talk about it. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14. When you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and you dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all of the nations around me, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your brethren. You shall set as a king over you. You will not set over you a foreign who is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses for himself. Did all of the kings do that? No. In fact, one of them died on a chariot. Nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. In fact, one of them bartered to have horses from Egypt. That didn't work out so well either. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself. Did that too, right? That didn't work out very well. Lest his heart turn away. That's exactly what happened. Nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. Yeah, that happened too. So also it shall be, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write for himself a copy of the law of this law in a book from the one before the priests, the Levites. What happened to the one king? They were cleaning out the temple one day, and then they found the book of the law and were all surprised by it because they found it in a trash heap. They weren't doing this. And it shall be with him that he shall read it all of the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God and be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted above his brethren, that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, and he and his children be in the midst of Israel. This is the passage, chapter 17, verses 14 through 20, where God gives them the direction for what the king is supposed to do and be like. Now, it wasn't until the 1600s that we had chapters and verse. Otherwise, it was just written like long letters, okay? Roll after roll of long letters. If you go to the very next passage in chapter 18, it talks about the priests and what you should expect of the priests.
Yeah.
It talks about what they should act like and what they should keep the children of Israel from. That's in chapter 18, verses 1 through 14, literally the very next verse from the passage we have here. The very next passage is verses 15 through 22, and guess what they talk about? You got to think about this one just a little bit. If chapter 17 talks about the king, chapter 18 the first part of chapter 18 talks about the priest, what's missing? The prophets. What did Jesus fulfill? 3 roles. prophet, priest, and king. They point directly to him and his entire role. Chapter 18, verse 15. And by the way, this is a very prophetic passage. Notice the hymns and the he's and how they are written. It's not good English unless it's correct. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst. This is Moses speaking, of course. From your brethren. Him, it's capitalized. Oh, that's the first of the sentence. That's okay. You shall hear according to all you desired of the Lord your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, what they have spoken is good. I will raise up for them a prophet. Oh, that's capitalized in the middle of a sentence. Must mean a name. Like you from among their brethren. And I will put my words in his capitalized mouth, and he, capitalized, shall speak to them with all that I command him, capitalized. And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require of him. But if the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. Don't get your prophecies wrong, folks. Make sure it's God first. And if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that this thing which the Lord has not spoken, the prophet has spoken it presumptuously, you shall not be afraid of him. That'd be a bad day. Bad day. The priests represented the people before God. The king ruled over Israel for God. Yeah. And the prophet spoke to the people from God. And Jesus filled all of these roles. All of these roles, you were anointed with oil before you started your position. Yeah. In fact, they called them the anointed ones. But there is an anointed one, capitalized O, singular. Do you know what that word is in Hebrew? The anointed one? Mashiach, or what we would say in our English, Messiah. This is a prophetic chapter and a half, all talking about what Jesus would do when he got there. You never blended these three occupations. In fact, we're going to talk about a fool that did, and it cost him his kingdom and his life. Because he tried to be the king and the priest. There's only one that gets this job. There's only one. Now later on, we are told that we are made prophets, or kings and priests, but that's church age. Anyways, so let's go to that man that messed it up so bad. 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 11. And Samuel said, what have you done to Saul? When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore, I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. Philistines are gathering at Michmash. They're outnumbered. Saul's panicking. The people are panicking. What does he know to do? Samuel's not coming, the man from the Lord. Well, nobody's talked to the Lord about this. And what happens if the enemy shows up before I've prayed? It's a good question to ask. But what Saul did was took the place of Samuel and made the sacrifice for himself. Verse 13, and Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly and have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself. When they picked out Saul, was God looking for himself? No. He was looking for the people. What they wanted. Yeah. And he gave them a man that was head and shoulders taller than anybody, good looking, and everybody liked him. And he failed him. Because it wasn't the one that he was looking for.
Yeah.
But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. The people were frightened. Samuel was late. Saul was frightened. I mean, it's just a bad situation all the way around. And Saul makes it worse by sacrificing to God without Samuel and usurping the priest's role. That was the first time. The second time you find in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 20. And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and I have gone on the mission which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the plunder sheep and oxen and the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed. It was all their fault to sacrifice to the Lord your God. Notice he doesn't say my God. Yeah. He says Lord your God in Gilgal. Then Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. He was supposed to destroy Agag, the Amalekite, and everything. But he decides to keep the best of it so he can sacrifice it to the Lord, and he decided to keep Agag. This sin would later come into play when we're talking about a queen named Esther. It was this goofy guy's ancestors that tried to wipe out the Israelites then, because Saul disobeyed here. Verse 23, I want you to get these underlined verses because they're important. They're going to come into play. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord. He also has rejected you from being king. Skipping down to verse 26. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return to you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Saul was trying to half-heartedly repent. And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe and he tore it. So Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should relent. Pay attention to verse 23. Rebellion is a sin of witchcraft. And then verses 27 and 28. The picture is Samuel goes to leave and I'm done with you, Saul. God's done with you. And as he's leaving, Saul's in a panic and doesn't know what to do. So he grabs a hold of Samuel's garment. And as Samuel's leaving, it rips. And Samuel uses that as a picture and says, listen, buddy, just as bad as you ripped that piece of clothing, God's going to rip you from the kingdom. And he's going to, notice verse 28, he's going to put someone in your place who is better than you. Now again, this is important, so remember it. When you look at Saul and David's life, Saul gets in trouble for trying to be a priest and a king. But you look at their life, David was much more of a priest than Saul ever was. Yeah. My goodness. He led worship. He danced. He called the people to fasting and prayer. He started worship services. He did all of that. In fact, of the 150 Psalms that are written, we know that 75 of them, or 73 of them at least, were written by David. Most of them when he was the king. Why is the difference? David did a whole lot more priestly stuff than Saul, and yet Saul had it ripped from him. You see, Saul took the place of the anointed that didn't belong to him. David, and we will quote it later on, refuses to touch the Lord's anointed. The priest was an anointed place, an anointed position, and David refused to touch it. Yeah. There's lots of things he did to draw closer to God, but he never touched the Lord's anointed. Yeah. So just in case, hands off, y'all. No, I'm just a joke, just a joke. Now, all of that brings us to, this little town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is actually a compound word. We say Beth, but it's actually Bet. It's the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, like our B. Bet and Lehem. Lehem is bread. Bethlehem literally means the house of bread. So we're going to go there. We've come from way up here at Jezreel and Gideon Springs, and now we're coming all the way down to the other end of the country, to Bethlehem. Here's the picture that I took. Notice how close these places are.
Oh, yeah.
It's literally down one hill and up another 3 to 4 miles, and you are from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. But David, what was his occupation before becoming the king and a warrior? He was a shepherd. Wouldn't you love to raise sheep on that hillside? I don't know that I could raise a goat on that hillside, much less sheep. Well, as we start driving down the road, this is literally what we're doing. We're going from a place called the Valley of Elah, and we're going back to Bethlehem to eat lunch, and then we're on to Jerusalem. And as we're going down the road, you can see Bethlehem on the right-hand side of our window, the west side. And you see this little peak and hillside and this town on top of it. Here's Bethlehem, and it's now on the right side, and you can see it looks a little bit better, a little bit greener on this side than the other, but still, I mean, that's a bunch of weeds. That's piles of bushes. That's not good grass, you know? And then here you go. Here's a beautiful picture of the side of Bethlehem, the hills of Bethlehem. Who notably was born or was from Bethlehem? Jesus. There we go. That's a good one. Who else? David. Who else was from Bethlehem?
Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph, but he wasn't really a relation. I guess, yes, that was not the question I asked. So yes, Joseph was from there. That's true. What about the greatest love story ever in the Bible? Ruth and Boaz. Ruth and Boaz. This is where they're from. Now, Jesus, referring back to the manna in the wilderness and where he was born, what did he call himself? I am the what? The bread of life. I'm the bread of life, and I was born in the house of bread. Isn't that cute? That's intentional.
Yeah.
During this time, during Jesus' time, Bethlehem had a unique job because they were in such close proximity to Jerusalem. The shepherds would raise the sheep that would be taken to be sacrificed for the offerings of the temple, because it's a short job, just a couple miles.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus was born, I should say, in that same town. And he was the Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world, John the Baptist tells us. Can you see a group of shepherds out on this hillside? In the middle of the night, and all of a sudden the light appears. It looks as bright as the sun. Maybe you could even see a little baby in a manger. Maybe it was in this building. No, that's probably a newer building in Jesus' time. So is that soccer field there. But you can almost picture just the entire sky being illuminated. Now, I want you to think about this. Being in such close proximity. How many of you in your lifetime have seen the Northern Lights? The Aurora Borealis. It comes all the way from the North Pole. And actually, right now, it's shining beautifully and bright in Michigan, where I grew up. And I remember seeing it as a boy. Thousands, hundreds of miles away, this beautiful light, its beautiful colors, even for a colorblind guy like me, it can be seen in the sky. It's gorgeous at night. Imagine what that heavenly host must have looked like for miles around. I just showed you pictures that in the course of 3 different pictures, you can see from the Mediterranean Sea to the Dead Sea. Yeah. And these guys are up in the sky, shining bright as the sun. I'm sure shepherds saw it, but I guarantee you there's some other people saying, whoa, what are those lights in the sky? What's going on? You all hear singing? Jerusalem's only a few little clicks away. All right. But going back even further in time, we continue on this Shepherd's Hill to see a little boy. He was youngest of 8. He had 3 older brothers that are over several miles away fighting the Philistines in the valley of Elah. His name is David. He's Jesse's son. Eliab is Jesse's firstborn. Next to him is Abinadab, and third is Shemaiah. They're all soldiers. They're strong and powerful men. And then there's this little ruddy boy out in the fields, not even worthy to come in. Well, here's now modern day Bethlehem that you can see there on the right. Mm-hmm. As we still continue to go just a little bit closer to Jesus' birthplace, to the place where Ruth and Boaz and Jesse lived and David lived, we come finally to a great place. A great place to get shish kebabs. That's all we did in Bethlehem. There wasn't really much to see, and we were pressed for time, and we ate at this beautiful restaurant that was made like a tent. And they made fantastic shish kebabs. But their lemonade, or limeade, that would literally put nose hairs in your brain. It would grow them so hard. That stuff was harsh. It was real bad. But the meal was fantastic. We had lamb shish kebabs and chicken shish kebabs, and both of them were amazing. And they also had Coke, you can see. But if you ever go there, if you get the chance, Shepherd's Valley Village Tent Restaurant, it's a beautiful thing to see. But that's all we had from Bethlehem. So now let's go to David's life just a little bit. We're not sure how old David was when Saul was anointed king. We know that Saul reigned for 40 years. That's what the scripture says. But we know that he was a boy, a young boy. Throughout David's life, the older he got, the more Saul's jealousy and fear ruled him. Yeah. And he began to search for David to kill him. And it only got really bad when David, the young boy, kills a giant named Goliath. And this young teen becomes a national hero overnight. Yeah. Overshadowing the king himself. Yeah. So Saul, the rest of his life, tries to kill David. And on one occasion, David goes to a little place called En-Gedi. And now we've moved from Bethlehem, and David has wandered around and ran from Saul, and he's down in this little place on En-Gedi. It's on the shores of the Dead Sea. Not a lot is grown in En-Gedi. If it wasn't bad enough that that's the Dead Sea over there, that nothing lives in it, you don't see much vegetation, except for that little patch of green right over there. This little oasis. And this is where we will go. If you go to En-Gedi and visiting Israel, you get to stop at this little place called Ahava. And if you are married or you have a significant other and she likes beauty products, you can spend a fortune in just a few moments in that place. My wife did not receive any beauty products from the Dead Sea place. This is the only place that exports Dead Sea beauty products because of the minerals that are in the Dead Sea. It's great stuff, but they're proud of it. And a little bottle like this would run you well over $30, and it wouldn't last you hardly at all long. But yeah, you get to go to Ahava. Here's a picture of En-Gedi. It means the spring of kid goats, and I'll show you that why in just a minute. But you can see everything around outside of this oasis is nothing.
Yeah.
This is actually a kibbutz, which means it is essentially a communist commune village inside of Israel. And that's at a very base term, but anyways, that shows you what it is. And here's the spring of kid goats. And here's the little goats. It's not actually goats, they're called ibez. And I've always, when I'd seen pictures of ibez or I've heard about them, I always thought they were like our white-tailed deer. And they're shaped like it, except in height. And they're not much bigger than our dogs. And they're all over the place over there.
Yeah.
And this one they're running out in front of traffic, holding us up from getting home. But I did get a picture of it. As I showed you when we talked about the tabernacle, this is the acacia tree and those gnarly branches. This is what the Ark of the Covenant was made with, if you remember us talking about that. But this is in En-Gedi. This is where I took the picture. I also found this little guy, this little crustacean. He was not as happy to see me as I was to see him. Up in this little oasis, and I mean, you're literally in the middle of a desert, nothing but rock. And then you come to this beautiful little oasis, and there's this little crustacean, and he's enjoying the water. And then this big old, fat guy walks up to him. He was not happy. He went like this, backing up the whole way. I got his picture as quick as I could. When David went to hide from Saul, he went to this place that's in the middle of nowhere. And the Bible tells us that he hid in these caves. Now, I'm going to be honest. These caves are straight up a wall of rock. It's not, there's no gliding. I mean, I don't know how they got in them, except to rappel down off the top of this mountain, because there's just no good way of getting up there.
Yeah.
See what I mean? There's the caves. This is a massive ravine, and then you go straight up from that. It was really difficult. But it was in these caves that David hid from Saul. And this one, it's got a little unique picture window part to it, and it kind of makes you wonder. But you found these caves all over this hillside, and there's a bunch of them. This is Ron Matson's daughter. She was the guy that led our group. This is his daughter, and she was our photographer throughout our trip. And she was really nice and sweet and friendly. Had a great time with her. She honestly reminded me exactly of my younger sister, Joanna. Dad mentioned it, and I'm like, yeah, that's her. Just very outgoing and friendly. Well, she was taking a picture of these caves, and I told her, "Oh, wait a minute!" And I wanted to take a picture of her taking a picture of the caves. So then she flipped the camera around to take a picture of me taking a picture of her taking a picture of the caves. It was good for at least one laugh, and we had a good time with it. But you guys probably had to be there, but we had a good time anyway. Here's a picture. When you get to the top of these caves, you can see the Dead Sea off in the distance, and it's really pretty. And if you didn't know it was the Dead Sea, you'd think it was gorgeous. Here's a sign I thought was pretty funny. It says, "Ibex may cause stones to roll down the slope. Wait for the animals to pass before continuing along the trail." We could see that driving down our roads. We've seen rocks fall off. Well, that's what the ibez does. And that's where they like to hide. They like to stay up there, way up on top on the thing, and look over. And that's nice and zoomed in. And that's not zoomed in. And you can see how far away they are. But here's there's two major pools. And it's just the most beautiful. This guy's over here drinking water. This is actually one of our guides. But it was just the most beautiful, serene place in the middle of everything that's dead. It must have given David hope. And it was just gorgeous. Here's some pretty cool rock formations. I thought that was pretty neat to see those. It's just unique. But anyways, I took a picture of that. Here's me at one of the fortification walls that have been reconstructed. And here is looking down on top of that pool that you just saw. This is the upper pool, and before you think it's small,
wow,
it's actually massive. It's really big. Now, there's many caves in the ravine, and the Bible doesn't really say, but it's possible that this one, and this is the one they believe, is called Dodom Cave, and that's where David hid from Saul. Chapter 24, when Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, look, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So he took 3,000 men, and he went to the direction of the wild goats. And we got to see those wild goats. As David is hiding, Saul goes in to relieve himself, or the Bible literally says cover his feet. Well, you can imagine if you're wearing a long coat to cover your feet, what you're doing. And while he's in the recesses of the cave, David is in there hiding from Saul. Boy, Saul can pick the room to make a stink, right? So while this is taking place, David sneaks up very stealthily and cuts the corner of his robe off. Afterwards, verse 5, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Look at verse 6. His men told him, God forbid, or he told his men, they wanted to just say, hey, kill him and then we'll be done, we'll be free. God forbid that I should do this thing to your majesty, the Lord's anointed. You see, that's the difference. Saul wasn't so concerned about the anointing of the Lord, but David was, even though the guy was literally trying to kill him and he'd already been anointed to be king. Yeah. All right. So now, verses 8 through 14 of this passage, David proceeds to yell out to Saul, putting himself and all of his men at risk, saying, why are you looking for me? What have I done to you? I'm not trying to hurt you. I could have hurt you. I didn't. This is David's response, or verse 16. When David had finished saying these things to Saul, Saul asked, is this your voice, my son David? Then Saul cried loudly to David, you are more righteous than I am because you have treated me well, even though I've treated you poorly. Verse 19, for who would find his enemy and then send him away safely? May the Lord repay you for what you have done to me today. Now I know for certain that you will be king and that the kingdom will be established under your authority. Saul knew from David cutting off his robe that he was going to be king. Now, why? Well, we actually already read it for you. When Saul failed to kill Agag, Samuel, and God condemns him, Samuel goes to run away. God used an illustration that was going to be a prophecy. David had no clue about what had transpired between Saul and Samuel. But just how Saul had ripped off a piece of Samuel's garment, David did the same thing to him. And it was in that occasion that Samuel said, it's going to be ripped, the kingdom's going to be ripped from you. And all of a sudden, Saul made the connection. Oh, it's going to be David. But notice what he says too. You are more righteous than I am. What did Samuel give as the prophecy? What did he say?
You would be better.
God's going to put somebody better than you. Saul knew immediately that this was a prophecy from the Lord. But there's actually more than just Saul cutting the hem of his garment, or having a hem of his garment cut. In Numbers chapter 15, the children of Israel are told to put tassels on the end of their garments. Okay? And they would take these garments and they would put them over their head and they would pray and they would use these as a covering. And they would take these tassels and they, to best illustrate it how we would know today, but dumbed down, they would take those tassels and they would rub them like a rosary, like the Catholics would a rosary. And they would pray like this. And this was their inner courtroom. This was their sanctum just between them and God. And that's how they would pray. Well, when you'd put these tassels on, if you were a priest, you remember when we talked about at Shiloh, they would have bells and then they would have pomegranates tied on these tassels.
Yeah.
The idea was it showed your authority. It showed who you were. It showed that Saul was the king. And when David cut that off, David was cutting off his authority. Now, you remember the woman with the issue of blood? All she had to do was go and touch the hem of Jesus' garment, because that's where the authority was. Jesus was pressed in on every side, but he knew power had gone out. Not because other people had been touching his tazit, that they call it. No. It was that her faith touched the hem of his authority.
Yeah.
And just that little bit's all she needed to be healed immediately. This is why it was so important that Saul lost the hem of his garment. Because God was cutting that authority away and God was putting David in place. And Saul knew it. So now let's go back to Mount Gilboa. We've been all the way across the nation. We've started at Jezreel way up here in the top. We went down to Bethlehem. We went to En-Gedi. And now we're going to go back up to the base of Mount Gilboa to a town called Bethlehem. When you go to 1 Samuel chapter 31, you find the story of Saul's death. It was right down here at the base of Mount Gilboa that Saul and his armies, Saul amassed his armies and were preparing for war against the Philistines.
Yeah.
It was here, on this mountain that you see here, that he would fall on his sword and he would die with his sons, including Jonathan, who David loved. Mm-hmm. Here's some other pictures of it as you go by to give you a visual of that Jezreel, Megiddo, or Armageddon Valley. This is on the top of Mount Gilboa. There is an old Philistine city there that they've done excavations on. We will talk about those excavations when we come to Bethlehem. But I just want to give you the pictures so you can see it. It's massive. It's just on the peak of this mountain, and it had walls on top of it. You can see literally 360 degrees all the way around you. And this is looking to a little place that's called Endor. What I didn't mention in 1 Samuel chapter 31 was at the battle, Saul is in fear again. And God is not responding to his prayers anymore.
Yeah.
And so he literally goes through the Philistine camp. I never realized this. My dad, when we studied it, he pulled it out. I'd never realized that he had to go through the Philistine camp to find a witch who would literally raise Samuel's spirit from the dead. Mm-hmm. She was supposed to already be dead. Saul it was his job to have taken all of them out, and she was one of the few that was left. And he got so desperate that he was really willing to raise the dead to hear from God. Samuel is raised from the dead and tells Saul his fate. That he had one day, less than a day to live. But do you remember what Samuel said when Samuel was still alive? And he ripped off that garment? The first time in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 23, Samuel gave a prophecy that I don't even know if Samuel realized. Samuel said, "For rebellion is as the sin of" what? Witchcraft. And that's exactly how Saul would die. All written right there in Saul's 2 disobedient acts. And this, going to the witch at Endor, obviously was the third. But this is on top of the hill. Now I want to take a picture to show you what's below. This is on the bottom of that hill. It shows you how, these are people down here. By the way, that was a very long staircase, and I'm getting older and fatter, and it was not easy to do. Because this staircase went up this massive hill, and then it went that way, and then that way. And actually, it started way down over there. It was bad. And I had to jog it because we were running out of time, but I wanted to get pictures from up on top. It was bad. This is actually a Roman period city, and this is a massive amphitheater. It's beautiful. This is the Roman road where they would do chariot races, and these would be like a city market. But I don't want to get too much into that because that's all extra credit. That's coming up when we get there. But I wanted to show you this because this is the hill, okay? And right here, all right, I want you to see this little spot right here. You see that person right there? That's zoomed in as much as my phone would do. That's my dad standing there.
Yeah.
That, yeah. Well, what it was, Dad was like, I'll be down there and I'll wave at you when you get up there. Except we couldn't see each other. And it took me forever to actually find him, and I finally did. But you can see how that's a long way up.
Yeah.
I'd have been down there with your dad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I would have rolled back at him.
But now I want to show you the picture that my dad took looking up.
Yeah.
I was up over there when I took the picture. It's a long way up there.
Yeah.
And here's why it's important. You had the Jezreel Valley, Mount Gilboa, where Saul died. You had Endor, where he went and met with the witch. After Saul died, they took Saul and Jonathan and his brothers. They stripped them naked, abused them severely, and they hung them on the walls of that city up there.
Wow.
For literally everyone to see. That's the top of the fortification. The rest of the story is men from Jabesh Gilead came from some 30 miles southeast of this place. They took the bodies down in an act of heroism and gave them a proper burial.
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make is two things, really. First off, when we fail to be obedient, the enemy gets to cheer and show off.
Yeah.
And it should be a glaring warning to all of us not to give them the opportunity to do so. Our world's lost enough without a bunch of us Christians making Jesus look bad. We're his ambassadors, right? What's the ambassador do? The ambassador goes to other places and tells about how great their king is.
Yeah.
And that's the second point that I'm trying to bring up. There's always been a God, there's always been a man that God had in mind to rule over Israel as king.
Yeah.
And his name is Jesus. He's the Messiah. And there isn't anything the world can do about it. But you and I are his ambassadors.
Yeah.
We get the fantastic job of not beating people over the head saying you need to change sides.
Yeah.
We get to go to them and tell them how wonderful our King is to us. How blessed it is to serve him. Some will never turn. But there will be some that will be so desperate to leave the king that they follow that they will begin to follow. They will begin to ask the right questions. And as his ambassadors, we'll be able to give them the right answers. Let's pray. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.